Hey, it's Vanessa from CraftyGemini.com. Today I'm going to teach you how to make bread. Yes, you don't need any fancy machines or bread makers or anything like that. All you need is what you see on the table right here. So let me walk you through everything. Here you need a bowl, obviously. I prefer glass, but you can also use a plastic bowl. You're going to need a whisk and a wooden spoon. Then here I have a measuring cup with 1.5 cups of hot water. Here I have some honey, and I'll show you how we use this in a second. A 1/2 cup measuring cup, some measuring spoons, salt and oil. I have olive oil, but you can use any oil you'd like to put in your bread. Here is the yeast, of course, and then we have 2 different types of flour. You can just use white bread flour, you can use just whole wheat, or you can mix them like I do. I find that just the whole wheat makes the bread way too dense for my flavor, so I like to mix them both, and I'll show you what the ratio is when we start mixing things up. So let's get started. First thing we do is take some hot water. Make sure it's not just lukewarm. You want it to be like hot bath water, somewhere around 103 to 108 degrees. I never actually use a thermometer. I just gauge it by hand, and I've never had a problem. I'll show you what you're looking for. Now the honey, I'm just going to drizzle just a touch in there because the yeast actually feeds on this. So make sure you don't put a lot, especially if you're making savory breads, because you don't want the honey flavor to come out. You're just using that to feed the yeast. I move it around with my whisk just to dissolve it. If you're using sugar, go through the exact same process. Now comes our yeast. For the 1.5 cup of water I want to put 1.5 teaspoons, okay, of the yeast. And notice what I'm going to do. You're not mixing it in. You're just sprinkling it across the top. That's 1 teaspoon, and then I'm going to get the 1/2. And do the same thing. Just sprinkle it. Don't move it. Don't touch it. Just take a clean dish towel and cover it up. Now you're going to let it sit for 5 minutes. After 5 to 7 minutes, this is what you want your yeast to look like. It looks a little puffy to the top, and it's one sheet across the entire top of the bowl. If your yeast doesn't look puffy like this, you want to just dump this out and redo it. Make sure that the water is a little bit warmer. Maybe it wasn't warm enough, or maybe it was too hot. So just try it again. And once you get a feel for it, this won't be a problem. Like I said earlier, I've never had a problem with the temperature. Just try to go for a hot bath water. Now I like to start with the whole wheat flour. I'm going to add a 1/2 cup. Here's a 1/2 cup measurement of the whole wheat flour. Just level it off like that. And you're just going to dump it directly into your bowl. And this is where you want to really whisk this up to activate all the gluten in the flour with the yeast and all. So you see how it's nice and frothy? Just keep whisking it for about 30 to 45 seconds or so. If you want to add more whole wheat flour, you can go ahead and do so. At this point, some people just use whole wheat flour. I tend to find that it's too dense. So I like to do a mixture. So 1/2 cup is all I'll use in this batch. So I'll put away the whole wheat flour. And now, at this point, I like to add the salt and the oil. So I like to add 2 teaspoons of salt to this 1.5 cup of water that we started with. So here's my teaspoon measurement. There's 1. Some people find this too salty, but if you want, you can start off with 1 teaspoon and then go from there. And that's 2. Move that around. Now the oil. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of oil. And I'm going to be using olive oil today because I want this flavor in here. But again, I said you can use canola oil or whatever oil you want to use. So just 1 tablespoon. Just like that. And whisk that together. And now we're just going to add our regular white bread flour. And you're going to add the flour in 1/2 cup increments, okay? Because you don't want to overflour your stuff. You want to mix in every 1/2 cup and keep going until I show you the consistency you're looking for. So here's 1/2 cup. Add 1. And I'll usually add whatever my mix-ins will be right now after I put in the second 1/2 cup of flour, because it's still kind of liquidy and you can mix things in here nicely. So for example, if you wanted to make rosemary baguettes, I would chop up either some fresh or dried rosemary and dump it in right now. You can add anything you want, really. Raisins, sun-dried tomatoes, basil, anything. I mean, at this point, you can make the bread into whatever kind of bread you want. So it's really great to just play around with different ingredients you have in your house and see what you come up with. I've actually even put pumpkin puree, canned pumpkin puree in here, and it turns out great. It's really moist. If you want the bread to be a little bit chewy, go ahead and crack an egg or two in here if you want that. Just play around with it. It's a really versatile recipe. Now I'm gonna add another half a cup. Now notice I'm still using the whisk, but you'll see after I mix this in, it's gonna be a little too clumpy for me to keep using the whisk. So this is where I'm gonna switch over and actually use my wooden spoon to just stir this stuff around. Okay, so I'm gonna put that aside, add another half cup, and use my wooden spoon and just mix it around until it's all incorporated, and just keep going. And the reason I don't tell you a specific amount of flour to use in total in this batch is because it really does depend on how much moisture there is in the air. If you live in a more humid climate, you'll need to add a little bit more flour than if you live somewhere a little bit drier. So I'm really just gonna show you a close-up shot of how you want the consistency of your dough to look like. Add another half cup of flour and just keep stirring. And really, this is not so hard. Just takes a little elbow grease, and that's all it really takes. You don't need an expensive, fancy bread maker or a mixer or anything like that. I have one of those big commercial mixers, and I don't even use it for this because really it's unnecessary. Another half cup. And you're gonna keep doing this in half cup increments until you get to a point where the spoon can almost no longer turn or stir the dough because it's all into one huge ball. I can still see it's a little bit loose, so I'll incorporate the rest of this in there and just keep going. You see how it's getting together? It's all combining itself into one big ball. Okay? But it's still a little loose. It's not exactly how I want it. And you see how it kind of still sticks to the spoon? Before you dump it out on your working surface to knead it out, you want to get it to where it's not just stretching like that. Another half cup of flour. You can see how it's not sticking to my spoon anymore. You see that? Okay? That's how you want it to be. And I just take a little bit of flour, sprinkle it around like that, and then you're gonna dump your dough right onto your work surface. And it's okay if it's kind of in a few different chunks. We're gonna bring it all together. Make sure you wash your hands for this part and just start combining everything. You see how it's kind of still sticking to me? You see that there? You don't want that. So we're gonna get another half cup. And don't put the whole half cup in. I just like to sprinkle it a little bit, push it into the dough with my hands, and then I'm folding it in from the inside out like this. I mean from the outside in. Okay? Because it's okay if the dough kind of sticks to you a little bit, but you don't want it to just peel off like it was doing earlier. You want to try and get it as dry as you can without over flouring it. You see right there, it's still too wet. So I'll put a little more flour there. And this is the kneading part. Everybody has their own kind of style of doing this. Sometimes when I get real into it, I'll use the heels of my hands and kind of push it in there. But you can see my fingers are no longer sticking to it, so this is pretty good. And then you want to knead it. It sounds like a lot, but maybe like 100 or 150 times or so, which is not that much. It just takes a few minutes. So now that my dough is nice and tight, and you can hear that, okay, sounds just like that. Now you're going to take a clean bowl and use a little oil, whatever oil you used inside the bread is fine, and just a little drizzle, okay? Now with that oil in there, just take your clean fingers and rub it around all the way to the top edge and all that. You take your ball of dough, put it in, kind of swerve it around, turn it out, and then plop it in the other way. And then just take your clean dish towel, cover it, and just put it somewhere to rest for about 30 to 45 minutes. And what you want to see is that the ball doubles in size. In this bowl, it'll probably reach almost to the top, and that's what we want to see. After about 40 minutes, this is what you end up with. Okay, what you want to do now just takes a few seconds, literally just going to punch it down with my hand. You see how it's like a bag that deflates, just like that. And now you're going to cover it back up and put it right back where you had it for another 30 to 40 minutes. So here's my dough after the second rise, and it went a little higher than the first time just because I had it close to the stove where I was cooking something else. So you see, it's nice and puffed up. You see all those air bubbles there in the dough pretty much. We're gonna dump it out on our surface. Again, flour it a little bit. And here we're not necessarily kneading it for the same reasons that we did before, but we're actually gonna just knead it just enough to get the air out. A little too much there. Just knead it enough to get the air out. All right. That dough looks good. Now you want to separate it into whatever pieces of bread you're going to decide to make out of this. So you can make baguettes, which are long ones. And I'll do one of those. Let me cut a chunk off here. And just work with it so it doesn't stick like that to your hands. And notice what I'm doing. This is how I like to do it. I kind of just roll it and tuck those edges under, so I get a smooth side on the top. And just to stretch it out depending on how long you want it to be. Just play with it. It's like dough, like any other kind of dough. You can make whatever you want out of it. With the kids, you can make funky shapes and things like that. So there's one. And here I'm using a non-stick surface on a big cookie sheet type thing. You can use just regular spray non-stick on a regular cookie sheet if you have a non-stick one. If you don't, you can just use parchment paper, anything that just won't allow the bread to stick, and that'll work fine. So let me show you how you can make some dinner rolls also. I just took all those edges in, and that's how you get a nice smooth surface, okay? So just tuck all that in there. Nice little ball like that. And just put it there. And you want to give your bread space because they're going to rise first and then they'll rise even more after you bake it. To give the bread a little decorative touch, I like to take a sharp knife and just go and cut slits into the top of the bread. Not too deep, but it just adds a little something. To the circle ones, you can do whatever you want. And then we're just going to set this entire tray aside to rest. And at this point, what I like to do is actually preheat my oven, so that in the time that the oven is preheating, my bread is rising and getting ready to go in the oven. So now that our bread has risen and it's almost ready to go inside the oven, what I like to do to add a little extra shine on the top of the bread once it's done is to make some egg wash. So all you need is an egg. Crack it into a little bowl or cup, add a little bit of water, and then just beat the egg up. And then you're going to brush this mixture onto the top of the bread. Take my brush. And just brush it up. I'm going to put this tray into the oven at 375 degrees, like I said earlier. And for this amount of bread for one tray, and given that I didn't make it into just one huge ball, I'm going to probably put this in the oven for about 35 minutes, and then I'll check it. And I'll show you how to check once we get to that stage. If I were to put all of this dough into one big ball, you'd probably want to leave it in for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then check. If you made a bunch of small little balls, then probably put it in for 30 minutes and check. So kind of you just gauge it. And baking bread is not like some of the other baked pastries and things you make that if you open the oven you completely ruin it. Don't worry about it. After 30 or 35 minutes you're safe to open it, check it. If it needs a little more time, you can just put it back in and go from there. So our bread is finished baking. It's come out of the oven. This batch went in for about 35 minutes at 375 degrees. As you can see, I've already let them cool a little bit. Now I want to show you how to check to make sure that your bread is cooked through. If it's still in the oven and you're kind of going on the minutes and you're not sure if it's done or not, just grab an oven mitt, pull one out, and you want to tap the underside. If it sounds like this, nice and hollow, then you know the bread is cooked through. If it's still a little soggy or doesn't sound hollow, put it right back in for another 3 to 5 minutes and then check it again. If you're gonna eat it, it's good to go as soon as it comes out of the oven. Now, if you're gonna store it, you wanna make sure that you let the bread cool completely and come to room temperature before you put it in a plastic baggie. But they do store well in both the fridge and the freezer, okay? I hope you all enjoyed my tutorial, and I hope that you'll go out and try making your own bread at home, because it's really easy. Also, if you all throw in different ingredients and things, I would love to hear your comments on some new ideas to make different types of bread at home. Hey, it's Vanessa from CraftyGemini.com. Today I'm going to teach you how to make bread. Yes, you don't need any fancy machines or bread makers or anything like that. All you need is what you see on the table right here. So let me walk you through everything. Here you need a bowl, obviously. I prefer glass, but you can also use a plastic bowl. You're going to need a whisk and a wooden spoon. Then here I have a measuring cup with 1.5 cups of hot water. Here I have some honey, and I'll show you how we use this in a second. A 1/2 cup measuring cup, some measuring spoons, salt and oil. I have olive oil, but you can use any oil you'd like to put in your bread. Here is the yeast, of course, and then we have 2 different types of flour. You can just use white bread flour, you can use just whole wheat, or you can mix them like I do. I find that just the whole wheat makes the bread way too dense for my flavor, so I like to mix them both, and I'll show you what the ratio is when we start mixing things up. So let's get started. First thing we do is take some hot water. Make sure it's not just lukewarm. You want it to be like hot bath water, somewhere around 103 to 108 degrees. I never actually use a thermometer. I just gauge it by hand, and I've never had a problem. I'll show you what you're looking for. Now the honey, I'm just going to drizzle just a touch in there because the yeast actually feeds on this. So make sure you don't put a lot, especially if you're making savory breads, because you don't want the honey flavor to come out. You're just using that to feed the yeast. I move it around with my whisk just to dissolve it. If you're using sugar, go through the exact same process. Now comes our yeast.